When you need to graft live stitches together in your knitting, 3-needle BindOff is the way to go. Hi, welcome to CHeri Knits. I love knitting and I want you to love it too. Today I'm going to show you how to do 3-needle BindOff. It's easy, it looks good, and anytime I can use this instead of Kitchener stitch, I do. Let's take a look at how to do 3-needle BindOff. There's times in your knitting when you need to join pieces together, and often you'll be seaming pieces. If you have finished edges without live stitches, then you do different forms of seaming them together. When you have live stitches, then you need to graft the stitches together. So you would graft these stitches to these stitches if I wanted to connect that. There's several different ways to do that. One of my favorites is 3-needle BindOff. I like 3-needle BindOff because it's easy to do. It's a lot easier, I think, than Kitchener stitch. And anytime I can get away with doing 3-needle BindOff instead of Kitchener stitch, then I do that. And if you're not sure what Kitchener is, there'll be a video coming up for that. But it's just another way to graft your stitches together. So let's take a look today at 3-needle BindOff. 3-needle BindOff is just what it says. It's a technique to graft and bind off by binding off your stitches together using 3 needles, 3 tips of needles. Today I have these on circular needles. I have one piece on a circular, the second piece on a circular, and we're going to use a total of 3 needle tips to do this process. So what we want to do is put the pieces together that you want to connect, that you want to graft together, and you want to put right sides facing. So I'm going to turn the pieces so the right sides of the fabric are touching each other. And that, in this situation, in this instance, is the stockinette side of the fabric. So those need to be together. Get all the extra yarns out of the way. And then you want to have the needles that you're going to be working with up at the same end. So I left the yarn attached to one of the needles, one of the pieces of fabric. That's going to be the working yarn. The yarn from the other piece you can just get rid of. You don't need it, so I cut it away. And I also have 2 pieces of fabric that have the exact same number of stitches on them, and that makes it a little bit easier. You don't need to have the same number of stitches, but it does make it a little easier if you do. But I will tell you what to do if you happen to have 20 on one side and 22 on the other side, how you can make it work and end up getting rid of all your stitches. So you have right sides together and you're set up. Both of them are at the tip of the needle, both pieces of fabric with one working yarn available. And you're going to take the tip of one of the needles. It doesn't really matter which one. You could use either of those. And what we're going to do is start by knitting 1 stitch from each needle together. So go into the front of the first stitch on the front needle and the first stitch on the back needle and knit them together. So it's just like a knit 2 together, but from 2 different needles. And we take that off. Now you don't want to pull too tight. You don't want things really loose and sloppy, but you don't want to pull it too tight because you don't want this seamed edge, this grafted edge to be puckery or pulled too taut when you're finished. So go into the next stitch on the 2 needles and knit them together. And it looks like this. You're coming through that and then you're coming to the front of that stitch. Once you have 1 yarn through both of those, take it off. Now that I've knit the 2 stitches, I'm going to bind off. So you can either use the tip of one of the needles, or you can use your fingers to bind off, lifting that first stitch up, over, and off the needle, just like you would in a standard bind off. And again, I don't like to pull this too tight because I don't want it to pull tight when it's finished at this seam here. Now that I have bound off one stitch, I only need to work the next 2 stitches from those needles, and then I'll bind off again. So you start by knitting 2 together, bind off, but then you just have to do that knit 2 together one time. So you have your 2 stitches and lift it up, over, and off. Again, up through the front, bring it through, and then off. And the trick I find, what I forget to do sometimes when I'm doing this technique, is to actually do the bind off. So don't forget to stop and bind off your stitch. And just work that all the way across. All right, so you want to continue until you're at the end. So I just have a couple stitches left to do here. And you see I'm using 3 needles, binding off as I go. And then when you get to that very last stitch, you're going to take some scissors, cut the working yarn, pull it through, and you can see that on the inside of the fabric, the wrong side of the fabric, you'll have a tiny seam. It's actually, even with this chunky weight yarn, it's pretty flat. It's not a very thick seam. And then this is what it looks like on the other end. On the right side, it's a nice smooth connection, and I think it looks really nice. This is, I've used these to put sleeves, like the shoulders of a sweater together, and it works really well. 3 needle bind off. I like it a lot. Give it a try. Let me know what you think. And remember, you can do this because you are the boss of your knitting. I hope that was helpful and you're able to use it soon. And just remember, if you have 2 pieces that don't have the same number of stitches, maybe 20 on one side, 22 on the other, just do a couple times where you take 1 from one side and 2 from the other and knit 3 together instead of knitting 2 together. That's an easy way to resolve that. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel, like the video, give it a thumbs up, and leave me a comment below and let me know how you like this technique and what kinds of things you want to see in the future. Thanks, see you next time.